World War II, the largest and deadliest conflict in human history, began on September 1st, 1939, when Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. This act of aggression prompted Britain and France to declare war on Germany 2 days later, though they were initially ill-prepared for the scale of the conflict that would unfold over the next 6 years. At the time, Germany was aligned with Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, and Japan, which had its sights set on expanding across Asia and the Pacific. Together they formed the Axis powers. Opposing them were the Allied powers, which eventually included the United States, the Soviet Union, China, and many other nations. In the early years, Germany employed a strategy called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a tactic involving rapid and overwhelming force to defeat enemies quickly. This strategy was highly successful in the first phase of the war. Within months of invading Poland, the Nazis had overrun Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. By the summer of 1940, the world watched in shock as Hitler's army occupied Paris. With much of Europe under Nazi control, Britain, led by Winston Churchill, was left to stand alone. The Battle of Britain began in the summer of 1940 as the German Luftwaffe, Air Force, attempted to gain air superiority over the British RAF, Royal Air Force. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the RAF, supported by radar technology and the bravery of British pilots, managed to repel the German assault. Hitler was forced to cancel his plans for an invasion of Britain. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. Over 3 million German soldiers poured across the Soviet border in the largest land invasion in history. The Eastern Front became a brutal theater of war, with millions of soldiers and civilians perishing. By the end of the war, the Soviet Union would suffer over about 27 million casualties, including military and civilian deaths, more than any other nation. At the same time, across the globe, Japan, which had already invaded China in the 1930s, expanded aggressively in the Pacific. The war took a dramatic turn on December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, killing over 2,400 Americans and bringing the U.S. into the war. The following day, the United States declared war on Japan, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. The tide of the war began to shift in 1942. In the Pacific, the Battle of Midway in June marked a major turning point as the U.S. Navy dealt a devastating blow to the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 of their aircraft carriers. In Europe, the Battle of Stalingrad, August 1942, February 1943, was one of the deadliest battles in history. The Soviet Red Army encircled and destroyed a large German force, inflicting over 850,000 casualties on the Axis powers. This defeat marked the beginning of a long and bloody retreat for the Germans on the Eastern Front. Meanwhile, in North Africa, General Dwight D. Eisenhower led Allied forces in Operation Torch, which eventually expelled the Axis from the continent. By 1943, the Allies had launched an invasion of Italy, leading to the collapse of Mussolini's regime. D-Day and the liberation of Europe. The most famous Allied invasion came on June 6, 1944, D-Day, when 156,000 American, British, and Canadian forces landed on the beaches of Normandy in German-occupied France. The invasion, known as Operation Overlord, marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Despite heavy resistance and nearly 10,000 Allied casualties on the first day alone, the operation was successful. Within months, the Allies liberated Paris and began their push towards Germany. At the same time, Soviet forces were advancing from the east, driving the Germans out of Eastern Europe. By early 1945, the Allies had crossed into Germany itself. The Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944-45. Hitler's last major offensive in the West was a desperate attempt to break the Allied lines, but it ultimately failed, with the Germans suffering over 100,000 casualties. In April 1945, with Allied forces closing in from both the east and west, Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. This day became known as VE Day, Victory in Europe. But the war was not over yet. In the Pacific, the US was still battling a fanatical Japanese defense. After the brutal island-hopping campaign, which saw fierce battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the US decided to use a devastating new weapon: the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing an estimated 140,000 people. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing 70,000 more. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender, marking the official end of World War II. On September 2, 1945, known as VJ Day, Victory over Japan. By the time the war ended, the world was left to reckon with its devastating toll. More than 60 million people died, including soldiers and civilians, from Europe to the Pacific. The Holocaust, Hitler's genocidal campaign, had exterminated 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, including Poles, Romani people, Soviet POWs, and disabled individuals. The war left much of Europe and Asia in ruins, with cities like Berlin, Tokyo, and Warsaw reduced to rubble. But it also brought about a new world order. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as global superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War.